Hello and welcome to episode 45 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by MetsMerizeOnline.com. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, along with my co-host and MMO executive editor, Mike Mayer. And Mike, the Mets have won a series for the first time since early April when they were in California against the Dodgers. How does it feel to see them finally win the series? No. But really, it was a good series all around, especially coming off another bad series against the Nationals team that they should be beating that they lost to over the weekend. But outside of Verlander's start, which we'll get to, nice, a lot of things to be happy about these past three games in Citi Field so far.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can win a series is great. Anytime you can win a series after losing so many in a row is better. And then when you can take a series from the best team in baseball, that's fabulous. Certainly not what anyone expected going into the series, and particularly after the first game and in with two outs in the ninth inning. I'm sure no one expected it. So yeah, I mean the Mets made that crazy comeback on Wednesday night to really kind of, I guess, rejuvenate their season is really what it comes down to. I mean, they lose that game and they're 4 games under 500, getting very close to last place in the division. So for them to get those big home runs from Vientos, then Alvarez with the 2 outs in the ninth inning, and then the walk-off from Pete, it just kind of jump-started them a little bit. And then to win today in another tight game against like I said, one of the best teams, well, the best team in baseball right now, it's just a huge uplifting series for the Mets. And it couldn't have come at a better time. I mean, this was starting to get pretty ugly pretty soon, like you talked about, losing series to teams that they should be beating pretty handily. So to come out and take 2 of 3 from the Rays, that's a huge step in the right direction. Kind of, I know it's early to say turning it around, but it was getting pretty late fast for the Mets, for a team that was supposed to be World Series contenders, for them to end up at 3 games under 500 and still have a lot of questions of how the heck they were going to win games. This was a huge step in the right direction and what they needed, and a lot of positives from the last 2 games, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you mentioned as far as that national series over the weekend, one positive from it, Scherzer looked better, which is good. It's probably one of the best outings he had all year. So that was a positive there. And the win from the series in Washington over the weekend. But yeah, obviously after the first game, like you said, Verlander really not looking sharp, giving up the 6 earned runs, didn't look great. And then up until really last night, outside of Vientos kind of getting things started with even them up there, the Mets offense-wise continues to struggle against left-handed pitching. But it's all about the youth these last couple of games. Obviously, we've talked about Mark Vientos for a while, and Mike, you've been really last couple of weeks, up on the soapbox there trying to make, pitch to get Vientos on the major league roster and, playing with the big league club sooner than later. And obviously they finally made that move, calling him up and starting him yesterday, paid dividends. I was shocked that ball went out. It was almost dead center field. It looked like it just kept carrying, which was great. But just some youth, feels like some new energy kind of injected in the team. Obviously, you brought up Alvarez tying the game in the ninth inning. That was really probably his big coming out moment now as a big leaguer so far. And then Alonso doing what he does, right? Cracking homers, nice with some guys on base last night there. And in the game, Pete's getting hot again. I know he's been under the weather. Buck's been talking about how he's been sick, but we joked today after the game, he, whatever's ailing him, he hopes it stays because he's been hitting so well the last few days. But it's definitely a step in the right direction, like you said. Obviously, outside of Verlander's rough start to start the series, Senga pitched great in game 2, 6-inning pitched, 1-run ball, struck out a dozen hitters. And McGill had a nice quality start today. And he continues to kind of settle in now as I would say, a very good, back end number 5 starter. It's obviously, we've talked about it, the 1 through 4 you got to get to there, but some promising stuff so far. And
I think one of the biggest keys, or potentially the biggest key from this entire series, is Kodai Senga.
Sure.
Kodai Senga, it's been pretty much mostly an up and down year for him. He'd have a couple of starts where he would have trouble with control, but still limit the runs. And then he's had a couple of starts where he didn't limit the control or runs. And then he faced the best, by far the best offense in baseball and struck out 12 of them, setting a Japanese record in franchise history for the Mets, and only giving up 1 run in 6 innings. And he looked great doing it too. It wasn't like this was some outing where he got a bunch of great plays in the field that he was lucky to get through. I mean, 12 strikeouts is quite a feat in 6 innings, and his ghost fork looked great as it has all year. But I thought he looked more aggressive with his other pitches, particularly his cutter and his four-seamer. He was finally throwing them for more strikes, which certainly makes his forkball even a bigger weapon because they can't sit on it as much. And speaking of that forkball, so there's, out of all the pitchers in Major League Baseball and all the pitch types in Major League Baseball, with 25 plate appearance minimum, his ghost forkball is the only pitch in the major leagues that still has yet to give up a hard hit ball against them. So no balls in play have been hit at 95 plus against this forkball this year, which is, it's just amazing. I mean, and it's just incredible that it's backed up exactly what everyone talked about. Like, that was all the hype of Senga coming over. Is like, oh, the ghost forkball, and some people like, oh, this is just a gimmick, that type of thing. Like, it's not. I mean, he had 7 whiffs on 10 swings in his start against the Rays, and it's just, he's making really good hitters look bad with his forkball. And like I said, I think his fastball command was really what kind of put him over the edge in this start. And I mean, we've talked about it numerous times that he's a guy that was going to need to adjust a different ball, a different mound, a different country. There was a long adjustment period for him. And for him, I mean, this was his 8th start in the big leagues. So to him kind of have that signature start where, I mean, let's face it, he looked like an ace in that start against the best offense in baseball. So that's just a huge step for him. It's got to be a huge step for his confidence. I know he talked after the game where his parents were watching the game and his sister for the first time, and he was just glad that it was one of those games where he didn't get booed. So I'm sure this is a huge confidence boost for him to be able to take everything from that start and kind of take the next step as a major league pitcher, and hope that he doesn't have any more of those 4, 5, 6 walk games like he's had in the past. That's kind of not only struggled to limit runs, but he hasn't gone deep in games. I mean, if you can get him to go 6, 7 innings every outing, that'll be a huge step going forward for the Mets rotation. That's been their biggest weak spot all year.
Yeah, no, I agree that that's obviously the best he's looked so far pitching in the majors. And again, yeah, you know, the stuff is front line from the fork to what you're talking about to the cutter to the four seam where he gets up to 98, 99 miles an hour. I think he might have hit 100 at one point. You know, it's really tantalizing. You see front of the rotation stuff with him, and you know, you kind of nailed it as far as it's gonna. We've talked about it's going to be an up and down year for him. Obviously, it has been, like you said, you know, adjusting to everything. I hope that maybe this can now be the turning point for him, kind of that confidence booster where now he can build on that a bit more, like you're saying. I don't know. I imagine that this year it's going to continue to be a bit more up and down as he gets used to everything, like you mentioned. But yeah, man, you know, it's the stuff is there, and you know, you think about obviously this year and then beyond. You know, when he has, you know, a full season under his belt and is more comfortable, what his ceiling can be. You know, you finally get to see that true potential the other day. But you know, I guess I want to transition from that and talk about kind of the youth a little bit. Obviously, I mentioned it before as far as Vientos' big home run and Alvarez last night, but just how big of a shot in the arm is Vientos? Not only do you think to the lineup, because I think that's obvious now, and we'll talk about what didn't happen today. It worked out, but we'll get to some lineup decision. Yes, we'll get to that with that look. But just how much does does he bring from you know, a power perspective? We saw it a little bit last year, but it seems like obviously AAA was tearing the cover off the ball. It seems like a more disciplined hitter, and just kind of continuing, you know, with the youth movement with Alvarez, Beatty, just how much that kind of rejuvenates a ball club.
Yeah, I mean, So now just think of Alvarez and Beatty. Now they've got another guy that they've played a lot of games with. So another teammate they're really comfortable with. And they talked about, all of those guys kind of talked about it after the first game and how it just felt natural for them all to be on the same team again. And yeah, I mean, the Mets needed power, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what Vientos provides. I mean, that's his best skill is his power, and we saw it in the first game. Um, like you said, you didn't think it was getting out. Gary Cohen didn't think that ball was going out. He thought the center fielder was going to get it, but the strength from Vientos just
Mm-hmm.
kept that ball carrying and carrying and carrying to center field. And look, that's exactly why the Mets called him up. Certainly took a little longer than it probably should have. But the Mets have to hope that keeps going. I mean, again, we'll talk about the decision of not playing him today after hitting a home run in his first game of the year. But this is Vientos provides exactly what this Mets offense needs. I'm not sure he's going to hit for a high average like he did in the
Sure.
minors. I think that's expecting a little too much out of the type of hitter he is. He's got down on the strikeouts this year around 20%. I mean, in the majors, he's probably going to strike out in close to 30%, but that's pretty typical these days for a power hitter. So as long as he can keep providing that needed power, um, he's got to be in the lineup. I mean, I know I've been a strong proponent of Daniel Vogelback skill set and how it helps the Mets. And it did last year. He was very good for the Mets last year. Vogelback was. And he started this year off pretty good too. But after today, his OPS is down to 720. His slugging is right around like 360. Um, at some point, Vientos, and maybe we're almost at that point, Vientos needs to DH more
Mm-hmm.
against righties.
Sure.
I know the Mets put him at third base the first night, which was kind of super weird, and sat Beatty again after Beatty had homered the night before. So we're Mets fans are still trying to understand exactly what Buck and Epler's thinking are with these young players. I think everyone's still kind of confused because um, certainly they've made mistakes just in the timing of bringing players up. I mean, Beatty should have started the season with the team. Vientos should have been up sooner. Alvarez should have been playing more sooner. So for Beatty to sit in that first game was a little weird, and for Vientos to play third was a little weird too. He made one nice throw, but he also had a bad throw.
Mm-hmm.
Vientos isn't a guy I think the Mets want to play third base very
Sure.
often. And um, late in that game, Beatty actually ended up in left field,
Mm-hmm.
which he hasn't done at all this year, obviously. Even in the minors, he didn't. And leading up to this year, because his main focus was improving his defense at third base.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he worked on all offseason. So he wasn't in left field at all. So I think maybe the Mets feel comfortable doing that once they get Beatty some reps there now in practice. But I still think, getting back to Vogelback, I think the playing time for Vientos, essentially, if he's going to be an everyday guy, I think it has to be at the DH slot.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know what the Mets do with Vogelback. I'm sure, I mean, he doesn't have a ton of value off the bench because he
Mm-hmm.
simply he hasn't shown much power. So I don't know. And it's tough to carry Vientos and Vogelback where they're both essentially DH guys. So
Right.
the Mets are going to have some decisions to make. We've seen it with the lineups last couple of days with um, questionable decisions, certainly, of who's playing and kind of the positions they're playing. Um, it certainly looks like Buck's going to feel out this whole situation where, look, they have Vientos, Beatty, and Alvarez on the big league roster, and these guys need to play. So
Right.
um, Buck's got to work that around him not getting all the playing time for maybe some of the veterans he would like
Right.
to, because again, we've seen in a year plus between Buck and Epler that they prefer to play their veteran players
Right.
if they can. And in the lineup, they prefer the veterans to hit farther up in the lineup if they can. I mean, there's no reason for Alvarez, I don't think, to ever hit ninth again. I
Right.
mean, I think he's shown from a power standpoint that he just doesn't, he shouldn't be in the 9 slot. So that's certainly something to look forward going as we go, is like how Buck's going to manage those guys and how he's going to play them. I guess we should talk about the notification I just got on my phone. Gary Sanchez is coming up.
Wow. Who's going
So,
down?
we don't know yet. Well, I'm sure Perez is going down.
Because I guess
But
that kind of takes away what I was going to ask you. I was going to
yeah,
ask with that, is there a world where the Mets screw this up and they send Francisco Alvarez down?
yeah. So let's talk about Sanchez. I mean, he's been fairly good. OPS around like 900 since the Mets signed him a couple weeks ago. He had an opt-out clause that would have made
Mm-hmm.
him. He could have opted out and be a free agent again,
Right.
like he did from the Giants. He's been getting that base at a pretty high clip. He's walking a bunch in AAA. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Again, this is how Buck is gonna get Sanchez at bats, or is he gonna just strictly be the backup catcher as the Mets wait on Nito coming back from his eye issue, and Narvaez is getting ready to do a rehab stint in the next couple of weeks. So the Mets are suddenly going to get very crowded at catcher, but
Yeah.
I don't see any issue with it at all. I was kind of surprised that they didn't call up Sanchez a couple of days ago, because Perez isn't really a big league catcher.
Right.
I'm sure they kind of wanted Sanchez to get accustomed to some of the pitchers,
Right.
that type of thing, and just get accustomed to the organization. So, yeah, I mean, that you talk about another guy, potential pop. He had
Right.
40 extra base hits in the major leagues last year. So Sanchez certainly potentially provides more pop, like we talked about with Vientos.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Gary Sanchez is concerned, to me, you would think it's a move to lengthen out the bench as far as providing a little more pop, and that kind of goes hand in hand as far as we talk about as far as Vientos, and also with Vogelback. I just want to touch on that quick, and I agree as far as Vientos really obviously left-handers DH all the time, any left-hander that's there, and he should get some reps against right-handers. I just think, unfortunately for Vogelback, they're putting him in a spot where he's not the kind of player that they want him to be. They want him to provide this kind of power. Obviously, you even go back to the offseason with not signing Correa, right? With that deal falling through. And the Mets feeling like a guy like Vogelback was someone they can kind of roll through with DH when that's not really who he is, right? He's, like you said, he's a high on base guy, gets on base a lot, but doesn't hit for a lot of power. So it's hard to expect Vogelback to sort of, change the skill set of a player who he is to kind of, fit what the Mets are looking for. So, I agree as far as with Vientos taking most of those reps. And as far as Gary Sanchez is concerned, it's more power off the bench. I don't see him catching much, right? I would think it's more, he'll be, that backup catcher. And when you need a right-handed pinch hitter late in the game, possibly can tie a game for you with one swing, something like that. That could be what Gary Sanchez does. But we'll see. Interesting, the fall from grace for Gary Sanchez, right? How it's been for him when he came up with the Yankees only a few years ago, and now all of a sudden trying to resurrect his career here with the Mets. So hopefully they can, maybe catch a little lightning in the bottle with his bat.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a weird thing that to go from. I mean, he was the Yankees' everyday catcher for quite a
Yeah.
while, and now he's going to be the Mets' secondary catcher. It's yeah, it certainly doesn't hurt him. Look, Michael Perez isn't a good hitter at all, and he's actually not very good defensively either.
Yeah.
He's not above average defensively. So this is there's no loss here by the Mets giving Sanchez some at bats and just seeing how he does. So yeah, let's see how Buck kind of maneuvers all this now and see how everything works. And we'll have to see the roster move again. We assume it's Michael Perez, but hey, we know Buck is actually kind of a fan of having three catchers. So
Right.
maybe there's another move, and then Sanchez is that power bat off the bench, because we know also that Buck without the three catchers doesn't like using
Right.
his backup catcher to pinch hit it all. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how and if the Mets are able to work in some at bats for Sanchez.
Yeah, and this is a decent segue as far as what Buck's going to give, what lineups we touched on a little bit before. Obviously, Vientos and Alvarez, huge games last night. Vientos tied with a homer. Alvarez obviously ties the game in the ninth. And then today, for to be thanked for their contributions, they were told grab some bench. Alvarez, I can understand not Cat playing him night game after a day game after a night game. They said he was hurting a little bit too, so I can understand that. I can't kill Buck there, but Viento's not playing today, not DHing, was unacceptable. I mean, it's unacceptable. I understand Buck is a guy that likes to get his veterans going. That's why he was hired in the first place, because they knew it was going to be a veteran-laden team, all that, and it worked last year. This year, he doesn't really seem to be the guy for this team. And they're not going to make changes or anything like that. I don't see Cohen firing Buck mid-season or anything like that. It just the consistency-wise, it just would look good. But I don't understand. It's a win-now team, right? I understand all that. But if the veterans that you're playing aren't producing, then at some point, if you have viable younger players that are producing in the minor leagues, you got to give these guys a shot. And obviously, between Alvarez and Beatty forced their hand. Alvarez came up with an injury and is now, I feel, settled in very nicely now, especially behind the plate. And Vientos should have been a guy that's been up earlier. That's had a lot of success in the minor leagues this year at AAA. I don't understand the balance of trying to get your veterans going when you continue to lose games, and you can lose pace rather quick. You know what I mean? I don't see where he's coming from a lot of the times with this, because again, if they got off to a nice start and they had a cushion, so to speak, I could understand that. Guys struggle, you can kind of cover that up a little bit. But with the start that they've had, it should be all hands on deck, so to speak, and next man up. But if you're producing, you're playing, and it just doesn't seem to want to do that. He still really goes with the back of the baseball card, so to speak, hoping that resume will turn around for guys. I don't know if you feel the same, but
no, I definitely do. And I think, people that have followed Buck throughout his career, this has kind of been a common theme with him, is that he's been reluctant to play the younger players. And it's certainly to a fault right now. I mean, the Mets needed some offensive power before they called up Beatty. They needed it before they called up Vientos. Like they waited too long on both of those. And I one of the guys that kind of sticks out to most to me is Canna, because the Mets last year, seemingly, even after signing Canna, understood that, hey, he has reverse splits.
Right.
So we're not going to play him a ton against lefties. And then all of a sudden this year, they've decided that Canna is going to play against lefties, including the other day when they could have simply played Beatty against the lefty. Instead, they plugged in Canna. And I don't understand the thinking from the Mets side, because Canna still hasn't hit lefties well, and he hasn't hit anyone well this year. And I understand keeping Canna around. He had a good offensive year last year. It's still early, but the fact that you're still playing him against lefties just doesn't make much sense at all.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be any good reasoning behind it. And I think beyond the fact of what the actual lineups are coming out as, a lot of the times when Buck ends up answering questions about him, his answers don't make a ton of sense either, or certainly don't make you feel better about what the actual lineup is. And in talking with some people in the Mets organization, it's much different than when Luis Rojas was here too.
Sure.
Rojas was given a ton of input and didn't always have a ton of say in the lineup.
Right.
With Buck, it's completely different.
Right.
Buck is making the majority of these lineup decisions. And I mean, it's certainly showing in what he's done the last couple of days. It's just, you hope, obviously it's a good thing that the Mets have won the last 2 days, so it's not as much of a vocal point, but you hope that he doesn't continue to make what most people see as mistakes when it comes to inserting the right players in the lineup and putting them in the right spots in the lineup. So yeah, there's certainly concerns. I don't think the Mets won 101 games last year, and that hides a lot of issues.
Yep.
We're now seeing this year, I think we talked about it just as much as anyone last year, that I don't think Buck's that good of a manager when it comes game time. Look,
Yes.
we know that he's great getting a team ready. He
Right.
knows the rule book inside and out. He's good at making sure players are ready for different situations. That is good. That's a good part of having Buck. What is bad is his bullpen management, his
Mm-hmm.
lineup management, his how he decides to roll out his players, his urgency early in seasons or his urgency close in games when the Mets are
Mm-hmm.
losing. I think there's plenty that you could pick apart of Buck during games. I think that was a weakness last year, and they kind of won 101 games despite him because of that. And I think we're starting to see it. It's starting to show more this year. When you start losing, you see these issues a little more. And hopefully, uh, look, the Buck's not going anywhere
Right.
this year.
Right.
Even if the Mets struggled, I think Cohen is a pretty big fan of Buck, so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't see him going anywhere. So you got to hope maybe that Chavez or someone in the front office can get in his ear and be like,
Sure.
"Hey, these young kids need to be a part of now. It's not just the future with these kids. They're a part of this team now,
Right.
and they need to play big roles in what we're doing this year."
Yeah, agreed. Hopefully again that this series can kind of propel them. But yeah, when you have Edwin Diaz having maybe the best close of the season ever last year and things like that, like you said, covers up some faults when you win 100 games, and you're seeing it kind of rearing its head now. And hopefully there is more of an urgency with him with everything. So hopefully that takes care of itself. But before we wrap the show with you updating us on the minor league side, this weekend, obviously tomorrow, Mets go to Cleveland, playing the Guardians. Francisco Lindor, first time back in Cleveland since the trade a couple of years ago. So, real quick, who is going to burn this Mets this weekend first? Andres Jimenez or Ahmed Rosario? You got to pick one or both.
I guess I'll just pick Rosario because he hits ahead of Andres in the lineup. For some reason, I've never understood that. Just like I've never understood that Andres plays second and not shortstop, considering he's the better shortstop. Um, but actually, both are having really bad years
Yeah.
offensively. I mean, Jimenez, obviously, he had almost an MVP caliber type
Yep.
year last year. He was a monster. Um, and he's been bad, and Rosario's been bad this year, too. So maybe Carrasco gets the better end of this. And I think it can't be lost on us. We've got to at least mention it that the struggles of Lindor. He
Sure.
hasn't been particularly good so far this year. An OPS around 720 going into this series. So, yeah, I mean, and we know that Carrasco struggled. So I
Right.
guess you would say for the most part this year, it's been a lose-lose trade for both
Yeah.
teams. But I mean, I'm sure Lindor is going to turn around. You have to hope Carrasco does because
Mm-hmm.
even if he's just the Mets just need him to be the pitcher he was last year.
Right.
That's all they need out of Carrasco, a guy that has a 4 ERA and gives them 150 innings. That's all
Sure.
the Mets need.
Yeah.
That's all they could ask for. So it's certainly a very important start for Carrasco.
Yeah. And I want to correct myself. The Mets are actually at home this series. I mixed that up. So I apologize there. Mets are at home. So Lindor's not making that return to Cleveland quite yet. Sorry, I jumped the gun there. But yeah, I agree. Lindor's having a strange offensive year. He's batting like less than 220, but high RBI total. Like you said, the OPS isn't really there. I mean, as a whole, the offense just isn't really coming up clutch with runners. They're having troubles again with runners in scoring positions and things like that. And just you touched on as far as how crisp Buck runs a team and the fundamentals. You saw that last year. This year, not so much. Especially on defensive times, they feel a little sluggish. Doesn't feel as crisp as it was all around. But hopefully, the series can kind of propel the team forward. But with that being said, obviously want to end the show here a little bit. Mike, highlight some of the Mets minor leagues here. If there's anybody that's standing out to you before we wrap things up on this week's episode.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we got to talk about Ronnie Mauricio, considering he's the last man standing.
Yeah.
OPS is still good. It's still around 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
He's still not walking a ton,
Right.
and still hitting the ball on the ground a ton. I watched him today. He had a couple of ground balls. Still swinging out a lot of pitches. So one number we haven't really talked about on here is the swing percentage, which is
Right.
essentially the percentage of pitches that a hitter swings at outside the zone.
Okay.
Mauricio is right around 40% this year.
Okay.
The AAA average is 28%, and
Mhm.
that 40% would leave him with the fourth highest in Major League Baseball this year, with Javi Baez as one of the guys that would be higher. So, yeah, this is, again, what we're trying to talk about, because we know Mauricio hasn't walked much, but we know he hasn't struck out much. He's only striking out 16% of the time, which is fantastic. Sure. But he's putting the ball in play too much, essentially, because a lot of the times he's making contact with balls outside of the zone and hitting too many ground balls, like we talked about, 54%. So that's certainly something they need to hope that he improves on, and he certainly can. There's an article out today. Ellie De La Cruz, the superstar prospect for the Reds, he had similar issues with swinging outside the zone, not walking enough. He talked about how he talked with coaches, realized that was something he needed to work on, and has made significant improvements. So it is something that's teachable. So hopefully that's something Mauricio improves on. And I will have to say, too, I really tried to focus on his defense this week at second base. And besides just the fact that he had 3 errors at second this week, he doesn't look terribly comfortable there yet. I mean, he's a bigger guy for second base.
Right.
And he doesn't have a ton of experience at second base. This is a guy that was a star shortstop the moment he went on a baseball field, and was that until this year. So I think there's some growing pains still there at second. And I do think that the Mets would actually be making the right move of kind of holding off, calling him up. So that's kind of the Mauricio update. I still think Mauricio is going to make an impact at some point potentially this year. I just think the Mets are doing the right thing, kind of waiting it out. Another guy that I do think is going to make an impact in the majors this year is Mike Vassell, the starter for Binghamton, Double-A Binghamton. 7 more shutout innings today. His ERA is down to 2.19. He's striking out a ton of hitters. Fastball looks great. He's working on a new split change that he's working in this year. His command and control have both been great this year. Got, I think it's 44 strikeouts now in 30 innings and only 6 or 7 walks. So he's limiting base runners, which is always a good thing. And look, this is a guy coming out of high school that was a first-round type talent and just had some issues in college, and then fell to the Mets at the 8th round. So Mike Vassell is quickly jumping up the leaderboard to who's going to get a start for the Mets. If there's another injury. So I think he's a big time name to watch. And then down a little farther, Alex Ramirez is having a really good stretch. He's kind of struggled to start the year. OPS got around like 650, but he's turning around a little bit. Him and Kevin Parada, they picked it up lately in high A for Brooklyn. So, and Jet Williams returned to the lineup too. He missed about a week after getting hit on the left elbow. He's healthy and ready to go now. So, I mean, we'll certainly have a chance to dig a little deeper into the Mets farm system in these chats in the next couple of weeks because, hey, the prospects in AAA are hitting well, so they keep coming to the big leagues. So
that's right.
We'll keep an eye. I mean, Mauricio he'll be in the big leagues at some point this year. And like I said, I think Vassell will be too. So we'll keep an eye on everyone in the minor leagues.
As we always do, you're one of the best at it, Mike. But that's going to wrap up the show this week. We'll catch up with you next week after the Cleveland series this weekend. Hopefully another series win propels the Mets to keep going. But until then, guys, let's go Mets.